welcoming you to this conference at the European Parliament. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm particularly thankful for Professor René Repasi for hosting and inviting us to this premises of the European Parliament, and to give us the opportunity to share with you the findings of our research and discuss with you the implications and potential recommendations. So I keep it short because we are a bit late, but I think we will be able to catch up. So welcome everybody, and I hand over to Mr. Repasi, who is so kind to introduce us to the topic and his expectations of today's event.
Yes, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Indeed, welcome to the European Parliament. Given that I'm myself a particular kind of creature in this house, so that until February 2022 was fully fledged academic with my chair in European Union law at Erasmus University Rotterdam, and then destiny wanted it that I got the opportunity to succeed into the role of a member of the European Parliament, keeping my academic position at a very small scale at Erasmus University. It is therefore always good to bring together the academic world with its educational part, but also with its research part, and to the let's say political world. Nowadays I don't tend to say the real world anymore, since there is the third category of the real world that is somewhere out there. So in any way of how I can support this meeting of theory and political practice, I'm very much delighted to do so. So therefore, welcome here in the European Parliament. If I'm well informed, you already had a morning session that was very much young researchers dedicated. And I also see indeed many young researchers in the room. This is very positive to see, since that is basically where both worlds, the academic world as the political world, lives the most of. From my experiences in academia, and I might be a little bit over dramatic in that regard, once a young researcher has found a brilliant idea, he or she stops developing new ones, but is only repeating the old ones. So in order to advance academia, we need in particular young, fresh ideas that challenges those that started young and grow older in order to advance academia. And in as much as academia advances, politics also advances. So therefore, great that we can do this together. The subject of this project, which is of course ambitious, I mean Horizon 2020, this is the Champions League of EU-financed research, and this is the closing conference. So a very important point in such project. The better that we and the European Parliament can now hear what are the findings of this project. And of course it addresses with the issue of trust, a core issue for us in Parliament. Whilst the European Commission likes it to be trusted, they are a body that is having technical expertise. We as parliamentarians, we are the ones who are living, we are actually thriving on the basis of trust. And therefore, let me allow you to dive a little bit deeper into this. I do have to admit that I haven't had the time to read all the papers that were produced in the framework of this project. Hence, some thoughts that I bring in there with my academic background might sound premature from the perspective of the researchers of this project. But of course, the relationship of trust and governance is something that is always worth to look into. And I think that's also how to approach the particular subject. There is trust and there is governance. And what is the role of trust? From my perspective, the notion of trust is closely linked to the one of legitimacy. And in that regard, legitimacy, at least in my personal conviction, I'm following a Weberian understanding of legitimacy, so a subjective one, which means that a rule is legitimate as long as it is accepted by a citizen, even if this citizen is against it. So it is about acceptance, subjective acceptance of a citizen. And that brings us then to where trust lies. So there is legitimacy if a citizen trusts in the process in which a rule is made, in the actors that are involved in making such rule, and in the overall justice of all rules that are made in accordance with these processes and by these actors. If a citizen knows, either by brain or by emotion, that sometimes you lose, sometimes you win, but overall it's just, this increases the trust in the outcome of this whole system, and therefore it is legitimate. If we approach the notion of trust from the one of legitimacy, then we are in the very old traditional distinction that in particular in the relation of EU governance is of relevance of input, output, and throughput legitimacy. And at all three elements, trust is to be seen back. Trust can be gained by input actors that are trustworthy. Trust can be created by output that is to the benefit of citizens. And trust can be created by being involved in the creation of output, and that is the famous throughput legitimacy. So if we can find elements that build trust in all those three elements that traditionally are distinguished when we approach the notion of legitimacy. Trust is something that is earned. It is not given by the gods of whomever one is believing in or not. It is something that is earned. And like with many things that is to be earned, it is done in very small steps. And trust is earned by example or by education. We as a citizen hear that something is to be trusted, either because our parents also trusted it, or that we learned, be it in school, be it in society, that we have learned this is to be trusted. Later, the older we get, trust is created by experience, mainly our own experience. One realizes that a person, an actor, is to be trusted. A process leads to trustworthy results, or that the overall balance in the results that these processes and actors deliver is guaranteed. Finally, the more we expand as social creatures, it is shared experiences that bring us trust, so that we hear from our peers, be it friends, be it superiors, be it others, those that we recognize as our peers, that their experiences with these processes, actors, and outcomes is considered to establish trust. So with this element, trust is built. That is something that takes a long time. And the same is with the other side of the token, distrust. Distrust in that sense is earned as well by the same pathways. Distrust is earned by example. If your parents say something is just not to be trusted, you don't trust it. If your education says something is not to be trusted, you don't trust it. If you have bad experiences with processes, actors, or the overall outcome, you distrust. If others around you that you consider yourself trustworthy or to be listened to, and they say this is to be distrusted, or that is not worth trusting, you lose trust in it. Yet the timelines are different. Whilst it takes a lot of time to create trust, this trust can be done in a split second. That is, of course, something that here in the European Parliament we have very much experienced, unfortunately, quite recently. The European Parliament, we receive input legitimacy in the treaties, disputed by some constitutional courts, but we mainly reign by output legitimacy, that what we deliver is good for the citizens. But we start the game of gaining trust by the citizens, where it's already 0-7 against us, since we basically are part of the lack of trust in the European Union as a whole. But with each and every step that we delivered for citizens, the trust is improving by inches. And then we have situations like a former vice president of this particular parliament was caught in flagranti in her apartment with hundreds of thousands of cash paid by Qatar in order to change outcomes of this parliament. And decades of trust building of this parliament were crushed in a split second, basically starting again to earn trust by citizens. So while trust and distrust go the same pathways, the timelines are different. So if we look at this in practice, I believe research that is analyzing practice has to be built around the notions of trust and legitimacy. And the reason why I'm saying this is, for what do we actually need trust? It is good that if you are in a private relationship, that your girlfriend, boyfriend, your parents, or whoever you are in a private relationship with, that you trust each other. Is this something worth to be studied? By psychologists, maybe. Political science, it's a little bit less interesting. So why, from our social science perspective, we look at trust? Because we are looking at something that keeps our societies together. And when everything is going well, and each and every society can work well, the existence or the absence of trust doesn't matter, because the things go well. So it becomes relevant when things are not going well. And when things are not going well, then we need a conflict solution capacity, which is the state, which is judges, which are lawyers, the way of how we decided that conflicts are solved, that scarce resources are redistributed. So the decision of a conflict, you are right and you are wrong. And that's how we are going to do this. The capacity to solve conflicts is what keeps society together. And if there's no belief in the actors who solve conflicts, be it by means of lawmaking, be it by means of judgments, then society is getting less and less. And by that, the way of how humans interact is getting into big troubles, up to ending up in a society that is not worth to be called society anymore. And since conflict solution capacities requires always that there's someone who loses and someone who wins, we need a trust that believes that the system is legitimate. And therefore, we need to oscillate between what is legitimate and which role trust is playing into this, and how is trust built and how is distrust undermining the capacity to solve conflicts. So in this framework, an analysis of trust is always worth to be looked at, as basically trust is the very root that, at least in a democratic society, but ultimately also the non-democratic ones, since the lack of trust in a dictator leads to revolution, and then the dictator is gone as well. So therefore, the notion of trust and the legitimacy of a system that is built around it is core to understanding how our societies work, and core for, in particular, complicated systems such as the European one, with multiple levels, multiple tiers, whichever kind of flavor you in political science you're following in that regard. There are different elements trust can be looked at. From scrolling through the policy papers and the other papers that I have found on the website, that is what also this project was looking at. It was looking at, can trust be increased by transparency? It was looking at, can trust be increased by empowering single issue actors such as NGOs? Do we need it to make representative democracy to be more trustworthy, or actually not? Our comments on this, I think, is better to be done at the moment when discussed. And since I'm going to have a pleasure to be also on the discussion panel later, I will refrain myself with regard to these comments to the debate. And that should be rather it for introducing in a keynote manner into this closing conference. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope I was not talking too much nonsense from the perspective of the researchers that were dedicating 4 years of their life to this particular subject. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mr. Rapazzi, for this illuminating talk, which I think fits very nicely into our own discussion about the role and the contribution of trust to democratic governance. Now to proceed with this program, the next point is devoted to one of the objectives Horizon 2020 projects are always committed, namely dissemination. This research is paid by all of you, the European taxpayer. So that's why Horizon 2020 projects are highly committed to ideas of open access, so to making available findings of the research to everybody, also in an accessible manner. And for this purpose, not only this Horizon 2020 project, but all others are heavily engaged in developing formats that are highly accessible to make our topics and our findings transparent and accessible for a larger public. And that's why during the implementation of a work plan, we devoted considerable energy in developing videos, small video clips that have been developed by Camille. And I think, if I see correctly, we are going to see a teaser of this video just to raise your interest in the videos and then to look them properly at a later stage of this day or tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, we need to put the headsets, otherwise you will not be understanding.
Trust. Is trust not a fundamental element of any society? Trust that our elected officials will represent our interests. Trust that the laws and policies they enact will be fair and just. And trust that our voices will be heard. But what does trust mean in the context of governance? What happens when that trust is broken? What causes it? What are the consequences? Is distrust necessarily a bad thing? Welcome to EnTrust. We are a research project funded by the EU, where we explore the state of trust in governance across different angles and levels in Europe. Through our research, we've uncovered some fascinating insights into the forms, determinants, and consequences of trust and distrust in governance. And we're here to share our findings with you.
We shouldn't always focus on trust. We should focus on citizens' well-being, quality of life.
Young people are simply demotivated with institutions because they see no changes.
Lidt svært. Jeg kan ikke helt huske et tidspunkt, hvor jeg helt havde tillid til dem.
Trust is essential for participation of the civil society and citizens. Without this, there is no reason to participate.
I would say that there is an active attempt to not just shrink the space in which civil society can work, but completely destroy it.
Trebalo bi da se razvija poverenje, ali bojim se da nekako godinama unazad jaz I nepoverenje su sve veće I sve više rastu, a poverenje sve manje.
We need to transform the way we do policy making, that we need to think that we are doing policies for the citizens, but we are also doing them with the citizens.
How can we walk the line between trust and accountability? The EnTrust project has made recommendations on how to achieve this. Read our reports and watch our thematic videos to find out.
So sorry for the technical difficulties, but I guess once we publish the entire video set, everything should be working properly. Great. Okay, so it is my pleasure to share with you some key findings of the EnTrust projects, although this task is almost impossible to accomplish because summarizing the work of 4 years in 30 minutes is quite demanding. So I will just be highlighting some flashlights, some key important messages to take home. Now, do I ask you to move to the next. Okay, so as an introduction, I just want to highlight, to present you some basic standard statistical findings coming from population surveys, asking people, citizens, about whether they trust institutions. And you will see on the left graph the highly dynamic development of trust. So people constantly reassess whether they trust or do not trust institutions. So we see that the circumstances in which people live are quite essential for them to grant trust or distrust to institutions. So we have a movable target, and it is interesting to see what are basically the circumstances that have an impact on the development of trust or the development of distrust. The second problematic to which the EnTrust project wants to raise sensitivity is the difference between countries. Because we see here on this right side graph that we have countries where the population is predisposed to trust political institutions. And in our sample of countries, this is Germany and Denmark, which are considered to be high trusting populations. While on the other side, we have countries, this is Greece, Italy, and particularly Serbia, that are considered to be low trusting countries. So we have to see that trust is not a universal element. It depends on context. So not only on circumstances, but it depends also on context. And that's why it is so interesting for social scientists to figure out what basically drives trust and distrust of citizens. What are the processes and the dynamics that we need to consider? Next slide, please. Now, these were basically the objectives of the EnTrust projects. There were three. One was purely descriptive. We simply wanted to map how much trust is there out there among the population, and what for patterns and trust or distrust relations between citizens and political institutions can we observe and measure. Secondly, we wanted to understand and explain the propensity of people to trust or distrust, and not only on the individual level, but also on the level of societies, of groups. And finally, as Horizon 2020 projects, we are strongly involved in developing recommendations for actors involved in the business of policymaking. And this is not only political institutions, parliaments, executive and judicative, but certainly also citizens who are active, the mass media, to see what for a role they have and how they can basically reconsider, maybe improve their practices. Next slide, please. Now, the work plan consisted of 7 work packages, which I'm not going to describe in detail, but they show that we were heavily engaged in systematically gathering data and analyzing it. They can be grouped into two groups. First of all, we were interested in arenas of trust formation, because the argument was that trust is basically a relational element. It has a collective element that we have to understand. Work package 2 looked at street-level encounters between citizens and public administrations to see how far on the everyday life level of encounters there is trust or there is no trust. Secondly, we were involved in the meso level of political contentions between protest groups, mainly democratic grassroots movements and political institutions, and to see whether there is trust or distrust within political contentions and, as Mr. said, in political conflicts. And finally, we were interested at the macro level, at the social level, and here we looked at the mass media to see how within public debates trust is formed, contested, destroyed, because we argue that there is a strong public sphere mass media element in trust development. Before this backdrop, we move then to the individual level and try to understand what are the processes of trust formation and distrust formation. And for this, we looked with a psychological developmental perspective on young adolescents from the age of 11 until grown-ups of 15, how basically individuals develop trust, how they maybe moderate trust, how trust gets lost, how distrust is formed. And on the other hand, we conducted cross-sectoral, cross-country surveys to measure dispositions to trust and distrust, and also determinants and contextual factors impacting on these attitudes of individual beliefs. On this basis, then finally we moved to a work package that was basically based in Brussels, because the idea was to look at the relations between organized citizenship, organized civil society, and European institutions, to see in how far also on the European level there are practices and relations of trust and distrust, and from what basically a trustful collaboration between policy actors is feasible or not. Now let's move to the next slide and to the main findings. I want to highlight four points. The first point is to highlight that our project was not only interested in trust, but also in distrust. And here we were reacting to previous research that for our consideration has been too much interested in trust, arguing that if you measure levels of trust, you get a sense of distrust. So if the implicit assumption would be that citizens who tell you, I do not really trust political institutions, you would assume that these people do distrust political institutions. However, this assumption was never tested, and thus we have a problem of a missing variable. We don't know whether people who say that I don't really trust are really distrustful. It could be that they either don't care or that they may have also low levels of distrust. On the other level, having people who are highly trustful of political institutions do not necessarily are less distrustful. So we have to get a full picture in how far trust and distrust is related. And this also because political systems, particularly in democracies, are built on a balance between trust and distrust. Just look at the division of powers, executive, legislative, and judicative. The division of powers follows the idea that there have to be checks and balances, where the one actor is to some form distrustful of the other, to prevent mistakes, to construct a more accountable, more open, more responsive political system. And we have additionally the public sphere, the mass media, and the civil society, social movements who play the role of watchdogs. So on the constitutional level, we have the idea of distrust as a productive force. And we wanted to find out whether this is also the case on the level of the citizens and the engaged citizens. So then let's move to the empirical data. What I have here produced are findings from the population survey in the various countries. And here we had included questions which ask people whether they personally trust institutions, but we also included questions that try to measure their distrust. So whether they think that political institutions should always be addressed with doubts and should always be considered to be implicitly untrustworthy. And we find out that there is a very interesting combination of attitudes. On the right side, you see a very strong combination of trust and distrust, which we can call watchful trusters. So these are citizens who say that they personally trust a lot political institutions. However, at the same time, they say it is my business to be doubtful and to consider political institutions in their daily business as untrustworthy. So this does not exclude each other. This seems to complement very nicely into what we would call critical citizens, which are basically incapacitated to make democracy lively. The other two possibilities of either just trusting or just distrusting are not that often to be found in the population. So we have a fraction of unconditional truster who says, I don't have any doubts. I just trust. We could call them naive trusters. This is a quite small fraction of the population. what is more worrying is that there is a considerable group of the citizens who are unconditionally distrusting. So they say, I don't have any personal trust in the institutions. I have just doubts about their working and their trustworthiness. And now this is indeed interesting to find out what is the thinking of these people. Can they be sensitized? Are they lost basically for democracy? Or can they be saved basically? Can they be mobilized? And here I think our project has found quite inspiring insights. Next slide, please. For this purpose, we have to move to the qualitative data, which we retrieved in the 7 countries under analysis. And here I'm referring to the micro level of encounters of citizens with public authorities, and which shows to look at vulnerable families who are seeking the assistance of welfare institutions. This is family allowances, family assistance, children's allowance. So these are people who are really in a vulnerable position. We know from research that vulnerable population groups are very distrustful of political institutions. And we could confirm this. So if you interview vulnerable families, they don't speak very nicely about welfare institutions from whom they depend. And they give a lot of reasons why they are distrustful. I see that I'm on the wrong slide, but no, go please back to the work package 5, the next one. In work package 5, we found a similar element of combination of trust and distrust elements. So here the Czech team was conducting focus groups or coordinating focus groups in the 7 countries with, as I said, youngsters and adults. And what they found out in the discussions is that respondents were cautious about naively, blindly trusting authorities. These were certainly authorities related to school, to workplace, but particularly also to political institutions. And they say that this unconditional trust is highly problematic because it makes you vulnerable. It makes you less attentive and it makes you less independent. So people tell that all of them make experiences of people they trusted, that they were deceived, that they were let down. So in the course of the development of youngsters and adults, you have an element of developing some form of distrust, even in the people you trust. And this becomes, if you like, a form of prudent trust that makes you less vulnerable, makes you more independent and more attentive. So it's an element of growth that you have elements of trust and distrust internalized. Next slide. Now we move to the spheres of trust formation. And here we found indeed very interesting elements. As I said, in democratic governance systems, the media is there to watch the policy makers, to capacitate basically individuals to be critical of government decisions and to then make relevant decisions when going voting. So if you follow journalism, there is a very strong professional ethos in saying we have to be distrustful of the political system. We have to enable citizens to become critical, to be attentive, to be independent. So interesting enough, what this critical journalists say is that the trustworthiness of the media system depends on the media being distrustful. So we see that distrust has a highly productive element in democracies. And people do not trust in media when they have the impression that the media is not doing its job. And that's why there were indeed quite a strong warning among journalists saying that if there is a too much strong consensus in media reporting citizens get the impression that voices are not heard and that journalists are not doing their job. And thus, this might have an impact on reducing the trustworthiness of the mass media. So you see here, indeed, a very important element of productive trust, distrust. Now let's move to the next slide, which shows that also social movement activists and followers who are engaged in local grassroots mobilization, be that environmental issues or housing or other issues, they share this idea that distrust is an important element of generating participation in democratic elements. So they have two scenarios which they consider to be problematic. On the one hand, too much trust is problematic because this gives policymakers, particularly authoritarian regimes, too much power to do whatever they want. On the other hand, activists are very concerned about raising rates of generalized distrust because, according to their experience, this leads citizens into inactivity, into frustration, into apathy, potentially also into a radical opposition towards the system as such. So what they consider to be essential is to empower people and thus to teach them to be critical, to be distrustful of the political business, but on the other hand, to trust in the ability of themselves as citizens and of social movements to rectify, to improve the accountability and the democratic participation ability of political institutions. So we have here again a very interesting combination of distrust and trust formation. Now, next slide. The second element which I consider to be key for the understanding of EnTrust is to consider trust as a relational aspect. And here again, we are moving beyond the consensus in empirical research because most studies are just interested in individual attitudes or beliefs of citizens towards political institutions, which is problematic because they are decontextualizing attitudes and beliefs, dispositions to trust. What we think is that trust and distrust is always embedded in relations. And we have to understand these relations to make sense out of the attitudes and beliefs of individual citizens. What does this relational argument mean? Well, my trust in political institutions depends also on whether I have the impression that the political institutions trust me. My distrust in political institutions is also determined by the experiences I make of distrusting institutions. So there is a causal link between being trusted and trusting. Next slide. And this basically is also corroborated by our empirical analysis. Again, I'm referring to the population survey, where we find a correlation between the perception of being trusted or distrusted by public administration and the likelihood of trusting. So you see the yellow dots. These are the people who say that they have the impression that public administrations are trusting them when they go to public administration with their queries, with their applications. And we see that these citizens are also those who tend to trust political institutions. So there is a give and take. If you look at the blue dots, you see that people who have the impression that institutions do not trust them will also be those who don't trust political institutions. So we see a very strong element of reciprocity in trust relation. Now, this has very strong policy implication because we can say that those institutions who are distrustful of their citizens will create distrust among their citizens. So it is a duty of the institutions to improve the possibilities of creating trust, to arouse trust among their citizens. So there is a homework to be done by political institutions. Next slide. Now here I am with the slide I was orally already presenting, namely vulnerable families who are highly distrustful of the public administrations they are related with. And here we have indeed this connection of reciprocity. These citizens are experiencing the welfare institutions as being highly adverse, highly distrustful of themselves. They complain about an intransparent, unfair system that is constantly checking the eligibility, claiming that their applications are unfounded. So they make always the impression that the institutions don't care and that the institutions don't believe them. In a reaction, basically, they say, well, how should I trust these institutions? So there is a very strong sense of reciprocal distrust amongst this population. And this is true for all countries we analyzed. Also in Denmark or Germany, where we have high trusting countries, we have vulnerable people who have a high disposition to distrust and make related experiences of being distrusted by political institutions. Now, what we saw is there are elements of trust building. So you have individual clients who have a good relation to their caseworker, and the caseworker is working strongly on building trust because trust is important to solve the problems of the families. So there is rule abiding and rule bending practices to generate this trust. However, what we found out is that these good experiences with caseworkers does not spill over to trusting institutions. So even citizens who make good experiences with caseworkers still distrust the institution. And this brings us to the conclusion that the solution to trust building cannot be found on the level of personal encounters. It has to be on the level of the way how institutions work. Moving to the next slide. And here we are now with the final content-related element, namely trustworthiness. So here again, we see a deficiency of research because most studies just refrain to asking people if they trust or if they do not trust. Assuming that with this answer, they already say whether they consider political institutions to be trustworthy. The reasons why people trust or do not trust and why they're considered to be political institutions to be trustworthy or not are not measured systematically by studies. And this is what we did in the EnTrust project, because we argue that citizens always make judgments which are based on criteria, on assessment criteria to say why they do not trust and why they decide not to trust and why they decide to trust. Next slide, please. Now here again, we are with the qualitative research, which inductively try to make lists of trustworthiness criteria. And we can very clearly spot what basically the assessment criteria are. On the left side, we have the psychological developmental research doing focus groups with youngsters and adults. And the youngsters and adults, they say, well, it's quite easy. I trust public authorities which are competent, which know what they do. So competence is an important criteria to assess trustworthiness. Second one, transparency, predictability, consistency. Or do public authorities change their mind all the time? And this was the case during the pandemics. And this was basically the reason why many of these people didn't trust their governments, because there was no consistent policy approach. Finally, there were relational aspects. So how is the relation? Do I have the impression that the institutions are respecting me, are looking at me, are reciprocating my trust or distrust? Interestingly enough, there was little output legitimacy. So the performance, the outcomes were less important for people than the relation or the input to the trust relation. Similar, and that's the interesting thing, similar criteria of trustworthiness are also applied by organized citizens whose job it is to engage in policy making with policy actors. And that's why I'm briefly summarizing some key findings of the work package conducted among European NGOs. And if you ask them why they consider political institutions trustworthy or untrustworthy, you get a very similar list of trustworthiness criteria. It's incompetence, it's a lack of transparency, it's inaccessibility, and it is certainly a lack of integrity that makes a big difference. Next slide. I'm skipping this one. Perfect. So you see, if you look at the list of trustworthiness criteria, is that the citizens are basically telling you what you should improve. If you want to make political institutions more trustworthy, you have to ensure that there is enough competence on the side of policymakers. You have to ensure that there is integrity, so combat corruption. Make sure that there is rule of law. Make sure that the relation is transparent, that there is participation, that there is openness, that there is accountability. So looking at trustworthiness is the safest way of looking where there is a need of improving the relation between citizens and political institutions. Now, all of these insights we have been developing with the objective of identifying good practices and recommendations. And I want just to give you a very brief idea of how we proceeded, because we conducted a research project that wanted to be as participatory as possible. So first, a participatory element is our field work involved a lot of open interviews with experts, scientists, policymakers, NGO representatives, practitioners in public administrations, but also ordinary citizens. So we were interested in their views, in their experiences. In the second step, we did our jobs as scientists and tried to develop sound, empirical, validated and verified evidences, moving then to the question, what are basically the core problems that these findings are identifying, and what are the implications of our findings. We then engaged in policy dialogues. So for each report, for each element of our work package, we conducted lunchtime debates and roundtables. Lunchtime debates were a bit smaller, around 10 participants, roundtables up to 40, 50, with policymakers, stakeholders, experts, to find out what are basically the lessons of our reports, what are the specific policy recommendations to extrapolate, also because this for us is the first element of ensuring impact, of discussing with our target audience about what they consider to be the main lessons to be drawn. And from this then we developed policy briefs and a number of documents which do not only reflect our own empirical analysis, but also the responses and the recommendations we got from policy makers. Next and final slide. And these are basically 4 areas of policy recommendations which we extrapolated from our findings. And I'm not going to delve into each of them because we have developed policy briefs who clearly develop these ideas. But just to give you the main message. So first of all, we have to increase the trustworthiness of political institutions. And this has basically to reside on the level of the rule of law, according to which political institutions and democratic institutions should work. Secondly, we have to increase the ability of the mass media to provide citizens with reliable, verified information to make them capable of becoming critical citizens and participants of democratic processes. So there is a lot of job to be done to improve the potentials of critical journalism to do their watchdog job. Finally, we also have to provide more enabling environments for citizens to engage. So we have to fight for the preservance of safe spaces, of safe civic spaces. We have to defend activists and associations who are working for democracy and the rule of law. And we have to make sure that they properly are able to work on behalf of European citizens. So you see that we try to be as precise as possible to make our empirical evidence relevant for the researchers. And with this, I stop and thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian, for giving this overview of the work that we conducted during the last 4 years and the findings. And I think that also this is food for thought for the panel that is following now the discussion. So I would like to invite, well, we have already Mr. Repassi with us, and I would like to invite Mr. Lemaitre to join us, who is the Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. So we're very happy to have you with us. And also Jelena Valjesevic from the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade, and Gabriella Civico, who is the president of Civil Society Europe, but also the director for the European for the Center for European Volunteering. And possibly we will have also later joining us Mr. Ruiz de Veza, who is also a member of the European Parliament. So thank you very much, and for joining us. And actually, we are going to try to have quite an interactive discussion, and among in order to have different views. So we invited different people who can bring really the perspective of the EU institutions, policymakers from different institutions. We also have in the panel the perspective of the academy, and also the perspective coming from outside Europe, which is also interesting, but close to Europe. And then also we have the perspective of civil society, but also of, in a way, the social movements, as you engage, Jelena, in that research. So thank you very much. And so I would like to, I will move a little bit closer.
Yeah,
everybody shifted to the right.
I'm used to the fact that the institutions are right to me, but
so
academics are even more right. Something new.
So we are more on the left, we can say.
Exactly. Yeah. Civil society is indeed left to me.
But no, we try to have different views. We have also civil society more on the right there.
Fair enough.
So first of all, I would like to ask Mr. Lemaitre if he can give us a little bit of a feedback from his point of view, because you have actually decided in the Horizon 2020 that trust in governance was an important topic. And our project was among the first projects that actually were selected in order to contribute to the question of how to improve and increase trust in governance. And I think there are also new projects that are coming ahead. So and this, while this was done, we had quite a lot of developments which were not expected, which were a number of crises like the pandemic, also the Russian invasion on Ukraine, not to say latest development in the Middle East, which have put at test the cohesion of our societies and also the trust between citizens and government. So now that the first part of your program is going towards the conclusion, what do you take from this, and also as a reaction also to the findings that we just presented? What is your perspective as European Commission?
Thank you very much. It's Carlotta, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Carlotta.
Sorry.
Through you, of course, Civil Society Europe and also Mr. Repasi here, because I feel quite privileged today, as usually I do not benefit in such a direct way from the dissemination work on the basis of projects which are financed through the big common research program of Europe called now Horizon Europe and called Horizon 2020 when this project was first selected. But I feel all the more privileged because I feel very strongly about this topic personally. And it's not only since the Financial Times a few days ago certainly woke up that 2024 was a big year for democracy. No, it is simply that indeed, as policymakers in Europe, we have had for quite a while signals that also in Europe, democracy was under pressure and was losing in quality, in trust of citizens, and this for everyone cherishing our societal models, our freedoms should be a big cause for concern. And so I'm very pleased that, in fact, my predecessors, because I only came into this job in February 2023, that my predecessors indeed put some emphasis on the topic of democracy, of public decision-making, to shed more light on what could and should be done in order to counter this worrisome and negative trend that we are seeing. And let me perhaps, because I also feel extremely strongly about what is happening in Ukraine right now, you can see it here, something I'm carrying every day. Let me start with a quote by President Zelensky, who said, of course, for another reason, that freedom must be armed better than tyranny. And here, I think that it is a sentence transposable also to us. We must arm our democracies better so that they work better. And here I really would want to thank the consortium, I think of 7 universities which worked on this, so from across Europe, for having provided us indeed with very new and inspiring insight. The first thing I retained from the presentation, and I was not biased before coming because I had not made my homework, but I was trusting that you would tell me what came out of your research work. The first striking thing is indeed to see that there is a healthy relationship of tension between trust and distrust in citizens. I use it in my words now, right? Please be tolerant. And here I liked particularly your terms, watchful trusters, because I think that this is something we should aspire to have as many citizens as possible who are active participants, who are critical participants in the public debate, who can question, but who can also then form an opinion and give their trust to the democratic process and to the and to the system. And the second thing which struck me was that you put the emphasis on what institutions radiate, whether they radiate trustworthiness or whether they radiate distrust through their practices mainly, and what they appear to be in the eyes of the public. And this, I believe, is something which certainly European institutions can and should further reflect on. I don't think that we are starting from scratch, far from it, but certainly on the different dimensions which lead to trust or distrust of institutions. You mentioned competence, you mentioned transparency, you mentioned consistency, predictability, accessibility, integrity. On all these dimensions, I believe that we should reflect on what we can improve. There is certainly scope for improvement on everything here. And I believe that, and I hope I'm not being too uncritical and too trusting myself of the European institutions, but I really believe that we start on many of these from a relatively high basis, but there is one dimension on which I would put the emphasis now, and it's this dimension of accessibility, perhaps, or accessibility or capacity to engage on the side of the citizens with the institutions. And I think that in the Commission we have seen the conference on the future of Europe and the involvement on a fully random basis of citizens from across Europe, group of, how many was it, 200 people, representative, all ages, gender balanced, obviously, all types of professions, trades, etc., as really an experience which we should try to replicate also for concrete legislating, for concrete decision making. And this we have started doing. We did it for 3 pieces of legislation which we hadn't yet written. One was, I remember, I think on food security, something which is of course very sensitive for citizens generally. And I really believe that there is more we should reflect upon in order to also have this more direct accessibility and participatory practice in Europe in the future. I was far too long, I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. And I think there's a smooth transition also with the issue exactly of the trust in EU institutions and how this trust evolves and can increase towards citizens and civil society. And I wanted to ask Mr. Repasi, because he addressed this already in his keynote speech, because the European Parliament is clearly by the treaty, representing members of the European Parliament are directly representing citizens through elections. And also we saw also in our research, at least definitely for what concerns the EU level, that is the institution that is most trusted among the 3 main ones. although there was a slightly, there were some concerns linked to latest developments. But my question is if you can elaborate more what you said at the beginning of what for you are the factors that influence trust towards members of the European Parliament, individual members, but also towards the European Parliament as a whole. I think both for citizens and civil society and different groups.
Thanks for a very difficult question. First of all, I want to see this number that amongst the EU institutions we are, as it was said here on my right-hand side, the least distrusted one. But that's already something. Because now, let's say, when I was then also listening to the summary of the 4 years research findings, I was all the time indeed looking at it from the perspective of a legislator. And much of what was mentioned there is, of course, related to the executive branch, if I at least understood it correctly. When the thing, the perspective from the vulnerable families, but then also more in a more generalized, the correlation of trust and being trusted by public institutions. And that then the criteria for assessment of this trust are competence, transparency, and reciprocity, and not so much outcomes. But if I look at those benchmarks, then indeed for me it looks like these are benchmarks for the executive branch. And here I can relate to this. As I've mentioned in my introduction, my chair is in the Netherlands. And there we had a scandal that was shattering the Dutch society on child benefits and the degree of distrust of the public administration towards the Dutch society, going deep down, deep into the roots. So I can totally relate to this finding. But my question was also now more put to me as a member of the legislative branch and what this means to us. Let me put it like this. If I were to apply those criteria, now competence, of course, we're all competent. Huh? But what I also observe is now, let's say I put it against numbers that were published yesterday by our Brussels bubble #1 journalist platform, Politico, the last polls for the European elections, where we have now as on the 3rd rank, the ID group, so the fascists, which are not known in this institution as being competent. So it looks like the amount of people that are obviously incompetent when it's about European affairs are getting more and more support by citizens, which therefore questions me to which extent these criteria can be applied to the legislative branch. Transparency is a different story. Reciprocity already starts again. When we are in a public administration relationship, then there can be a sort of Deutsch des. I give something to you, you give me something back. But as a legislator, it's a bit more difficult, since the legislator's task is precisely balancing different conflicting interests, and we have to make choices. There can be no reciprocal relationship between a single citizen and us, because sometimes this is an interest that is going to be the one who wins, but sometimes not. So there can be no reciprocal relationship between a legislator and a citizen, except for you look at the aggregate and whether the overall result is fine or not. But I'm afraid that's not how citizens look at politics in general, but certainly not at EU politics. So what does it now mean if I then basically here I'm wondering whether there's anything in the findings of the project that is more applicable to the legislator's role as a public institution in all that. Since what we do see is that there are some parties who obviously want to undermine the trustworthiness of public institutions even more, because they gain politically by this. Speaking of the true people, which is not represented by an elite in public institutions, by that hijacking distrust in public institutions, but further undermining the system in order to get a political gain out of it. And in order to find a recipe against this kind of strategy, of course, you have to work with the issues of trust, and that is something that I'm still reflecting on. Hence, some thoughts on that. I do believe there's something into what you said in the beginning, that distrust is part of a working system of checks and balances. And if you take now Parliament in that, and given that there is, let's say, the most trust given into us, I think there is also a role of an institutionalized distruster vis-à-vis the other institutions. Our job is to hold the European Commission accountable. Our job would actually also be to hold union agencies accountable, or the European Central Bank accountable, but we may not. With agencies, because we have a fetish of the last decades that they must be as independent as the ECB, whereas the independence of the ECB in itself is something to be debated, speaking of accountability. But I therefore do believe that institutionalizing citizens' enlightened distrust, if I may continue with the word that you develop on enlightened trust, that there's also enlightened distrust, that Parliament gains support of citizens if we are not part of the public administration, in a sense, as rubber stamping. Whatever comes out of the Commission is rubber stamped by Parliament and goes through. But institutionalizing an enlightened distrust and holding the executive branch of the European Union clearly and visibly to account for what they are doing. And here there is a lot that the European Parliament can still do better. Since we are considering ourselves more to be part of the legislative machinery than as those who are really holding the European Commission to account. Commissioners, they are not afraid of getting into the structured dialogue where we have the Q&A sessions between parliamentarians and the commissioners, because the way of how we do this is not very frightening, certainly as compared to the United States Congress. So there is a lot that we could improve in this. And I do believe this is one of the main factors from what I've now taken from the presentations here, that as a parliamentarian, we could gain trust by citizens by being more effective in our role as an enlightened, institutionalized distruster, next to the job that we already do as a well-informed and well-working legislative machinery. Final point, that's the one on transparency, but there's probably also a question still going on this. Here, there is much more that we still can do, and here, side by side with the other EU administrative institutions, to be more transparent, in particular when we are hijacked by single-issue organizations, lobbyists we may call them, so that there's clarity for citizens who is trying to influence what we are deciding in which way, and that this is clearly identifiable by citizens. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was interesting what you raised. I maybe just comment that on one of the factors of trustworthiness, I think we had also the integrity, but the integrity not just to be understood as an issue of complying with rules, not being corrupt, but also respecting, ensuring that in the work there is consistencies with the values and the defense of the public interest. So I think that matches a bit also with what you just raised, and possibly also Jelena Alizevich can also complete this aspect, because you studied the role of social movement in relation to trust and distrust, and also how distrust can be also a factor for democratic renewal. So maybe you can further elaborate on that.
Thank you, Carlotta. So to elaborate on the issue of distrust, but I feel a bit strange because I feel as if I wear too many hats here. Of course, I'm an EnTrust researcher, and I know that I'm primarily here because of this. And I was part of the working package working on social movements. But I'm also here the only one who's coming from a non-EU country. So I, in a way, feel under the pressure to not represent Western Balkan countries, but in a way to speak on the subject of distrust or trust and distrust in EU institutions from the perspective of someone coming from the Western Balkans, where social movements are trying to make a change. So it is connected to your question. I'm not running away, shying away from your question. Of course, distrust is something that social movements rely on in a way. We heard about critical citizens and about how distrust is important because social movements are then trying to attract those citizens who are distrusting institutions, so those citizens that in a way withdrew their trust from the political processes. And then social movements are trying to attract that trust and to make productive use of it. And that was what we were, and in a way, researching, and we were trying to see whether we could use that and how institutions or how EU institutions could make better dialogues and how they could find ways to communicate with social movements and to treat them as part of of civil society as well. But then when we talk, as I said, because I come from Western Balkans countries and I come from Serbia, which also I cannot escape the fact, that we just had recent elections, fraudulent ones, and I apologize if I'm using this personally, this space, but I just cannot, I cannot help myself from doing this, especially because just last evening I finished a blog for European Alternatives, that's another civil society organization, right? And they asked me to write a blog on what happened in Serbia and on how politicians and civil society actors, what they need from, how they feel about the EU response and what they need from the EU. And I had to say that in this blog, in this piece, I had to channel my frustration, which is not only mine, it's a frustration of very many citizens from Serbia, that what we've seen in the case of Serbia is something that we've seen too many times from the part of the EU, is there's not a trust building process, it's a series of transactions, different transactions, so major irregularities happened on the day of the elections. Everybody knew that, reported on it, harsh criticisms came, EU officials criticized it. And then what happened is, what always happens in Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić makes a deliver. He delivers something. He delivers something that EU expects him to deliver. So whether it is exporting weapon to Ukraine or joining the Crimea platform, or as he did after the elections, he finally resolved the issues with Kosovo license plates, and then everything toned down. Okay, he delivers. Okay, we will continue and we will not be so harsh on the election. So it's not, the problem is that the source of trust of EU in Western Balkan countries was that during the first years of transition, democratization and Europeanization went together. They were part of the same package, and civil society organizations were also very helpful in that respect to kind of present that as these two paradigms, to present them jointly. And indeed, Europeanization was steering the process of democratization. And this is no longer the case. The two things became apart. And also citizens of Western Balkans and Serbia in particular, they now see also EU as an actor that does transactions, not that does trust building or democracy building. And that's a huge problem for Serbia, for Western Balkans, but I believe it's a huge problem for the EU as well. And Serbia is now, I think from 2 years ago or a year ago, it was for the first time, support for joining the EU fell below 50%. And this is really, in my opinion, a devastating effect. And also the mere fact that also being a pro-EU and carrying a European agenda is no longer an important leverage for opposition parties is also very problematic thing. And again, I apologize if I'm being too personal. I just couldn't escape this role. But I think that it's telling us something about trust building and this dynamic of trust and distrust. This morning we were talking about whether national contexts matter or not, and whether we should focus on, if we focus on national context, then do we focus too much on cultural aspects, whereas in fact we should be focusing on socioeconomic aspects. when I believe that national contexts and general contexts are very important. I don't think that stressing the national context tantamounts to stressing cultural context. I believe that these national contexts talk about socioeconomic and political particularities. They talk about certain contextual specificities, which are very, very important. And right now we have a situation, so I'm not talking only about Serbia. I think, and I believe I'm talking about much of the Western Balkans. I'm talking about Bosnia, I'm talking about Kosovo, I'm talking about North Macedonia, where we have so many social movements, bottom-up organizations that are trying to shake up the status quo of transactional relations between EU and domestic leaderships. And I'm hoping that they will able to also to attract citizens to build this social trust among citizens, but also I hope that they will be able to change the way the EU institutions regard Western Balkan policies and Western Balkan particularities in situations. So I do believe that social movements and civil society in large can be an actor here. I certainly have hopes, but I'm also kind of hoping that from the part of the EU, things will begin to change, and that they will also see new social actors as capable of bringing something valuable into this dialogue and contributing potentially to change.
Thank you very much. Now I think right on this issue, we can move to the UBEC again, looking at the perspective of civil society. And I think we heard from way the European Commission about the issues of how to make European Commission more also trustworthy towards citizens, civil society, and the example also of the conference on the future of Europe was developed, and maybe it would be interesting to have your perspective also because you were directly involved in this, but also how, I mean, civil society can contribute to also the role that was stressed of the parliament to play also to hold the other EU institutions accountable, and how the civil society can perform also this role and assist the parliament on that. So maybe you can tell us a little bit how you think the perspective of civil society towards EU institutions has evolved in this context. Thank you, Carlotta. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. Such an interesting debate so far and so complex. And I had my homework done for me by the office. So thanks a lot. So I have many things to say. I don't know how we are on time. So please tell me if we're going on too long. But I think just to start with by saying that, of course, civil society organizations, many of us are based here in Brussels, but not all. We have an understanding, or we hope that there is an understanding, that there is an open debate, that there is a space for dialogue between civil society and the EU institutions, and that our role as, the critical friend, being, constructive as part of the debates, affirming EU values, all leading to better policies. In the end, we all want the same thing, and we cannot expect that all EU policymakers have, the best competence, equal competence on all the issues. And we hope that they understand that civil society with competence on the specific issues is available to input into the policymaking process in an open and informed way, in a collaborative way, in a trusting way, in the end, to make better informed policies. I think that's what we're all aiming for. There are many positives that we can see in terms of how this relationship exists, not least through the funding of European networks. The European Union does provide structural funding, does provide operating grants for European civil society. And this is really essential to provide us with the stability, with the sustainability to be able to contribute to these policy discussions, to be able to
assist the institutions, to assist the policymakers in spreading EU values and in supporting EU values across Europe. And of course, the Lisbon Treaty has the specific articles which mandate the existence of structured civil dialogue between the EU institutions and between civil society, and of course create the European Citizens Initiative, where citizens can directly have a say on things. Unfortunately, and with the European Citizens Initiative, we have seen there that the trust has almost been completely broken in the process, with the failure of the Commission and of the other institutions to follow through on the promise to push through legislation where the ECI meets the threshold, as we have seen on the recent protection of animals ECI. I don't know if you're aware of it. If not, take a look. It's really quite, I would say, scandal that this has not been followed through. And these kind of things really can break the trust in a moment, when people can start to believe in a process, start to understand that these processes exist, and then when it's seen that it's broken on one side or the other, in this case, in the side of the institutions, then this is really setting us back, I don't know, I could even say years, in terms of the trust between citizens and the EU institutions. We do have guidelines on the public consultation processes through the better regulation process, but of course, consultation is not the same as dialogue. It's part of the process, and we also have to have trust, of course, in the way that public consultations are done. And we are hopeful that the better regulation process will improve with that. We need to go beyond this consultation, however, and in the civil dialogue side and in the dialogue side, we still need to work better and do better at creating a balance between citizens organizations, civil society organizations, working for and speaking up for and talking for the general interest of society, and then corporate influence, specific lobby groups for specific economic interests in society. And there we still see some imbalance with who has access to which policymakers and in what way. Also regarding access to documents, even in the digital age, we think everything is at our fingertips, everything is through our phones, through our digital devices. Unfortunately, there's still little or no public access to the member states' positions on legislative files until at the very end of the process. So citizens' ability to influence their own member states on the legislative process is very, very limited if they're not even aware of what their member state's position is. And the negotiations between the institutions also remains very opaque, despite recent European Court of Justice rulings that this should be made more transparent and more open for the citizens. The opaqueness of this is really something that destroys trust, that people cannot understand why this is behind closed doors, why cannot this be open, why this cannot be transparent for all the citizens to see which institution has which position and how these negotiations are going. Another area that civil society organizations have to take account of and be aware of is also the balance between debate and discussion directly with citizens, between policymakers and citizens directly, and then also debate and discussion between policymakers and civil society organizations. And indeed, we saw this very much in the Conference on the Future of Europe, where the space for individual citizens through the citizens panels was assumed and guaranteed from the very beginning from the part of the institutions, whereas the space for civil society, really we had to fight for it, push our way, encourage the space to be created for us, and eventually civil society organizations were involved in the Conference on the Future of Europe, which was a very important staging post in the evolution of the European Union. So we still need to seek and find a better balance between the direct dialogue between citizens and between civil society organizations made up of citizens, of course, but representing the views of different citizens as well. There is an increasing awareness in the EU institutions about the need to protect civic space, I think. I think maybe this is a bit too often maybe talking about protecting the civic space at the member state level, rather than a bit more self-critical look at where is the civic space also at the European level. I have in my notes here Qatargate. I guess this is a very Brussels bubble point. Maybe some of the people here are not so familiar with that, but it's a corruption scandal which has touched particularly the European Parliament. And I would say attacks on civil society, attacks on NGOs, the hurdles, the barriers, the difficulties that have been put in our place since then have been really quite difficult and quite shocking to many of us, that when there were problems within an institution, the response has been to make things more difficult for civil society. And this again is something which is breaking down trust, it's destroying trust as well. Nevertheless, we are hopeful for the future. We're in the year of the European Parliament elections. We really hope that citizens across Europe will have enough trust in the process to get engaged. This is the least we could hope for, the least we can ask for. And that, of course, is why Civil Society Europe and many of the member organizations of Civil Society Europe have campaigns to encourage citizens to vote in these European elections. And the coalition of all these campaigns together is being led by Civil Society Europe, so Civil Society for EU. So you can look at that and see how you can also maybe engage in building up enough trust, at least that people will engage in these parliament elections. We will enter then a new legislative process, and we will see then if we can continue between civil society and between the institutions to keep moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Gabriella. And I actually wanted to ask Mr. Rapasi a question that was linked a little bit to the last point that you made about the transparency issues, because indeed transparency integrity was one of the elements that came in, as we have seen in the findings of the research, and there were also policy recommendations around that. At the same time, we have seen that also in the aftermath of the Qatargate scandal that was mentioned, the European Parliament in particular has taken a number of decisions to reinforce that. And so our question was a bit that we realized also that there is that a balance needs to be struck a bit between ensuring rightly a certain level of transparency, integrity, but also maintaining the openness of institutions towards citizens at large. So I wanted to ask you how you, as a member of the European Parliament, you perceive a little bit these new reforms, and how do you think exactly this balance can be struck? I mean, more in general, not on specific decisions.
Yeah. So I mentioned Qatargate also already in my introductory keynote. And it is still, let's say, quite a challenge to draw the right conclusions from what has happened there. And let's say there is some truth into it, that in order to fight vampires, you need to put light on them. And that makes it that transparency is one way to do that. Journalists is another one. But that is, of course, not the topic of here, yet journalism was, of course, somewhere mentioned. But let's say what I always tend to say in Berlin, since I'm coming from Germany, in Berlin we have 1 MEP per 100 journalists, and here we have 1 journalist per 100 MEPs. And if this little amount of journalists is then talking about something, it's always the same subject, so that there are hundreds of subjects that remain in the dark. But that is a question of journalist capacity in Brussels. The second one is indeed then transparency. That I mean, Qatargate happened because the representation of third countries was not covered by our transparency rules. Yet, even if Ms. Kaili would have made public that she met so often with representatives of Qatar, she would have accepted the money and she would have done what she had done. because just making transparent that you were talking to somebody doesn't take away that you have a character that is prone to this kind of activities. So ultimately, the whole system must be built that those characters who have so little political convictions that their convictions are for sale, that these then vampires do not actually enter this house. That's a lot of things that we hardly can regulate. It's about selection of people in national parties. That's not about the competence matter, how people are selected that are sent to this parliament, and according to which procedures, and whether there is any public attention to what is happening to these selection procedures in the member states, and the quality of the people that are actually sent there. Or is this just another national election where you actually vote on the chancellor or the prime minister, and you do not really care who by this vote you are sending into this parliament, irrespective of the competences that we do have. And this is all not touched on. So what we can touch is, of course, to shed some more light. For me personally, the new rules have actually not changed much. But that was because when I entered, I already committed myself voluntarily to publish all meetings that I have, irrespective of my role. Under the old rules, we only had to publish meetings if we were involved in a concrete legislative file or if we had a certain position within Parliament. As a beginner, you have no positions. And I was also not in so many legislative files, but I made public with whomever I was talking, also irrespective of whether that was a public actor or non-public actor. You find on my website when I was talking to the Ministry of Finance of Germany, or to the permanent representation of Baden-Württemberg, or to the representative of Switzerland, although the rules didn't require that from me. It's getting a little bit more complicated because the meetings of my assistants also have to be put there, and then you enter a zone where the amount of information is killing transparency. If, let's say, every attempt of a finance lobbyist trying to get in contact with my assistants has to be made public, then it's boom. Because you cannot imagine the amount of finance lobbyist mails as a member of Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee I receive. Also about this balance. I mean, I have, let's say, out of 100% of contacts on finance, I have 1/10 from finance NGOs and 9/10 from finance lobby. Plus, on the top of it, that would mean that I'm only in contact with finance lobby and barely with NGOs, although the reality is the opposite. I ignore the stuff from the finance lobby, and I'm very much in conversation with the finance NGOs. So there's still the right configuration to be found that the objective is met, and that's what is relevant here to me. And I think this is now some fine-tuning that has to take place in the months to come, that we do not have a formalistic approach to transparency, and by that undermine the whole point of it. That citizens can actually see better what is happening here, and that those that are interested to shed proper light at what is happening here can do so. And that we apply those rules in our own activities in such manner that this goal can actually be achieved. And that is precisely as you just mentioned, that bizarrely enough, that those we actually need the most, namely NGOs that represent a counterweight to commercial interests, are getting impeded to have access to this house, although it's actually needed in order to balance the whole lobby debate out. This is totally bizarre, and we have this debate on funding of NGOs upcoming. So there is something strange happening here, but that makes it that we should always reflect on what is the whole point of the exercise, namely that citizens can get access to what we are doing here, and that we give the information necessary without overwhelming everybody out there with the amount of information that is made public. But let me reiterate, ultimately it's about personal character. And that is then also a duty for citizens that go to vote. Check the people you're voting for according to their personal and political character. Are they worth representing you as a citizen in this house that has so much to say or not, so that the vampires do not even enter this house?
Thank you very much. Moving to Jelena, because in in the one of the, let's say, deliverables of our project, we have this integrated policy paper, which outlines a number of policy recommendations that come from the different findings of our research. And as Christian mentioned before, also the debates and roundtables we had with different actors. And so there are a number of measures to strengthen local democracy, deliberation, and also the participation of youth and of young people in general. So my question was basically how the findings that you have on the role of social movements, how they can contribute to revitalize the democracy, particularly as in the period between the different elections, and also coming back to the issue that you raised before, also thinking also about the situation in Serbia.
Well, thank you. In our sample, in our research, we focused on democratic social movements. So we focused on those social movements that cherish democratic values. And as I said previously, but I will repeat it here as well, it's not because we think that right-wing social movements are not worthy of research. They are, but we wanted to focus on those social movements from whom we believe that we can learn something, right? So they are committed to democratic values, but they're also building alternative arenas of political participation. So in a way that they don't trust, or they don't trust fully institutional arenas, but they didn't give up on democracy and democratic values. And also, we wanted to focus on those social movements that responded to some of the recent crises. So we have environmental movements in our research. We have movements that focus on socioeconomic issues, on gender violence. So we researched relevant social movements that were formed as a response and through a response to these crises. So I think that they tackle the issues that we are all concerned with. So another reason why I think that we can learn from them and from their organizing. How can they help? That really depends. I mean, first of all, in our sample, we had very different social movements. So we have some social movements resemble NGOs. So some of them are formally registered, they pursue certain goals, or they have a very concrete goal, for instance, to change certain policies. This is especially the case with environmental movements. So they already cooperate with local institutions, with other social movements, with organizations. On the other hand, we had social movements that have different forms of organization. They have loose organization, horizontal organizations. So they're challenging any kind of political institutions. They're reluctant to cooperate. So it's very difficult to just to abstract one policy recommendation. But I believe that they all contribute to pluralism of life. They all contribute to making a civil and sphere of civil society very vibrant. And I think that it's very important to nourish and preserve channels of communication with these social movements. So if we are interested in issues like protection of environment or gender violence, we should not be only looking at established NGOs. We should also be looking of what's going on in the ground, especially on local levels, because social movements tend to be most active on local level, and they then tend to attract citizens who can act immediately and to address the issues that are very important to them. There are some tangible issues. So I think that we can learn a lot from them, and I think that we should really treat them as important part of civil society. So when we talk about engaging in dialogue with civil society, when we talk about engaging citizens, we should not be only doing it by ad hoc deliberative forum or by citizen participation that are completely organized top down, you know, and very rarely from time to time. But we should also be looking through a way, we should be looking through a way to institutionalize a dialogue with social movements that are very in flux. That is also, that represents sort of a challenge, because it's not like we don't necessarily have an organization that is out there so we know whom to talk and how to talk to, but we should take this as a fact, you know, the very fact that social movements come and go and that they move and transform. But still, the very fact that they attract citizens, that they manage to organize citizens, they manage to mobilize citizens, that speaks for the fact that they're important social and political actors. Right? So I don't know if I answered your question, but the important thing is to treat them as a part of civil society.
Thank you. Now I'm aware that Ms. Refasi will have to leave us, so I don't know if you want to come back on.
Oh, yeah, that might be.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and Gabriela, I wanted to ask you also about one issue that we covered also in our recommendations around the we've seen and this is also something for which, for example, the European Commission and European Parliament very much aware the situation of shrinking civic space in Europe, and also challenges to the rule of law, and there is a specific EU rule of law cycle for this. So one of the issues where were proposed was to develop a stronger measure to enable civic space in this context, and also improving the support to civil society organizations at all levels, and the framework for civil dialogue, which is also something that you raised. So I just wanted to know from you what you think the key steps that need to be taken in order to achieve this.
Thank you, Carlota. And again, I really have a list, not to forget anything, because it's not something that, that's the first time we think about this. And again, it's a situation where we only wish that civil society would have been more involved in the creation from the first place, because these comments would have been the same, and then we could have had a better cycle from the start. And I know that we are communicating constantly these suggestions, and hopefully improvements will be made soon to make the rule of law more effective and transparent. So the first thing that we want is a specific section on civic space. We think this is quite logical, quite obvious, and I think this is the building block for all the other things. We need what we're calling an early warning system for CSOs to flag violations of rule of law in their countries, so that EU institutions can address this swiftly, quickly, with the necessary information that they need. At the moment, it's really not clear how civil society organizations, or indeed social movements, or any citizens' bodies can really flag their concerns to the EU institutions. So this early warning system or some kind of mechanism needs to be established. There needs to be much more transparency on how the input that civil society organizations give to the cycle is used in the country reports, or not used, as maybe we see. There is a very lack of transparency on this point. And then there's also a lack of transparency in how these issues raised in the country reports, and how these issues are really putting conditionalities on the access to EU funds and the triggering of Article 7. Again, we just want and hope and wish that there could be more clarity, more transparency on that. That would enable civil society organizations to do our job watchdog, of critical friend, of being part of this society, of being part of implementing EU values in a much better way. We need also, in conjunction with the rule of law cycle, a proper framework, a real framework on civil dialogue. So there needs to be a legislative framework whereby civil society organizations are involved in the policy making of the EU institutions, and a real roadmap with clear timelines, accessible open consultations, targeted consultations for specific stakeholders with specific expertise in the specific fields of the files, and that civil society organizations' opinions, suggestions, evidence can be clearly separated from industry representatives such as business groups, and that not everything is taken together. There should also be clear guidelines for selecting members of expert groups as well, making sure that civil society is also properly represented there and representing the general interest that we work so hard to do as well. It should also be mandatory for the institutions to justify why proposals from the expert groups are not involved and not included in the final texts. Sometimes the final text don't include, or very often don't include, all the recommendations made by the expert groups, but with very little or no explanation why these things have been left out or why certain things have been changed contrary to the advice of the expert group. So this, of course, needs more transparency as well as more transparency on the meetings of the council and their working documents. I was trying again desperately, for example, during the Spanish presidency to really understand what conclusions were coming out, who was working on what. It's incredibly difficult, even for somebody who is full-time in Brussels working on advocacy issues. So imagine for the regular citizens or smaller NGOs or social movements trying to navigate their way through legislative files are very, very different. Finally, we need more support for civil society, clearer guidelines on the operating grants, go back to true operating grants and move away from this project logic of working packages of deliverables to really fund the core work of the civil society organizations through the operating grants, rather than forcing the running of the organization into a project type model. This is very important. And there needs to be a stronger feedback mechanism on the goals of the grant making and the application and reporting requirements, and of course continuing along the path of hopefully decreasing the administrative burden on civil society organizations in those processes as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. I take the opportunity also to welcome Mr. Ruiz de Veza, also a member of the European Parliament, and for being with us in this panel. So I will have just a couple of questions, again for Mr. Lemaitre and then for Mr. Ruiz de Veza before we move into general discussions. So first of all, Mr. Lemaitre, I just wanted to ask you a question about, well, you know that also during the pandemic, the role of science came into the spotlight, in the public opinion. At the same time, there are also challenges also to the role of science in the context also that we around exactly the issue that we faced during the pandemic as well of disinformation. So I just wanted to ask you, what is the role that EU research policy can play in order to respond to the needs that appear in society, and also to ensure that the contribution can be correctly transferred and openly transferred to the media and also to the wider public? What is the view of the European Commission on that?
Well, thank you very much. I think your question points to the fact that the recipe to a healthy, vibrant, self-confident democracy is one of very, very many ingredients. And we heard about a few today. And I certainly would claim that research and how research is conducted is part of those ingredients. Of course, some people will always claim that the Earth is flat. There are arguably more in the US than here, which is good. But still, I think the majority, vast majority of people are indeed interested in basing themselves on, let's call them scientific evidence or truth, ideally. Truth is a big word, but some facts. And the progress of humanity has been built on progress in science. And we need to continue, of course, to invest in that, in a spirit of enlightenment, of widening the knowledge that humanity has at its disposal. And of course, it also goes about understanding our societies and how they tick, as this project illustrates. But coming back to the notion of trust, there needs to be trust in what emerges from research processes. And for that, again, let's take the world of research as an institution, as a public institution. How does it appear to citizens? How are research results communicated to citizens? These are questions which are important for citizens ultimately believing in what they hear from those research institutions or not. So I just drop here the term research integrity, which encompasses many things, but it is a certain approach to research which guarantees that the researchers themselves are ready to be scrutinized, to be confronted, to be contested, and so on and so forth, for the benefit then of the robustness of what comes out of that process. And of course, they must also show indeed transparency in the methodology and the data and so on and so forth. So we come back, in fact, to basic notions which have been mentioned earlier and which are very true also for research. But then I would point to something else, which aims to show that this recipe really is one with a very long list of ingredients. I am not a scientist myself. And I, as I said, came to this world of science and funding science not that long ago. And today, perhaps I do not struggle with the terms I am encountering, but I can tell you in my daily job, there are many things which I have a very superficial knowledge of. You know, we all heard about, as we're still all under the impression of the pandemic and the flurry of scientific talk that we were bombarded with. Everyone has heard about mRNA, right? And that mRNA was fundamental for, I would say, the main type of vaccine that was developed to fight COVID. Now, mRNA, so I know what the M stands for. For RNA, I already need to struggle. M is for messenger. Of course, I don't know the basics of that, what underlies that. What I want to say with this is that we need people, and that is the media world, in the media world, we need people who can vulgarize things, who can tell complicated things in an accessible, simplified form for all citizens, benefits, in fact, because we are heading inevitably towards a world which will be less and less comprehensible because of technological progress of all types, which will invade all of our, which have already partially invaded all of our daily lives. Of course, it is about the digital revolution, which is ongoing and probably accelerating still, but it is also about biotech and about future approaches to health, which citizens might not be immediately comfortable with. And we saw it, in fact, also with the pandemic. The resistance to vaccination was an illustration of the lack of trust. What is this thing, mRNA, etc. And so we really desperately need to develop some science literacy also in journalism, to have people who can communicate easily, convincingly, and of course, based on trust, based on facts, towards the general public. It reminds me of what was said over the last days about Jacques Delors. Because he, for one, was someone who was spending a lot of time reflecting on how he should speak about his vision for Europe, about European integration, in order to make it understandable and for it to resonate among Europeans. And I think that we need people like that who make the effort, spend time on understanding themselves and on making what they understand understandable to the general public.
Thank you. So, making things understandable is also a way to remove a bit the distance of citizens from institutions and addressing their
sorry, if I can just add,
yes.
Because as I was now on media, I would want to emphasize one or two more things. And in order to have that, to have these journalists, etc., we need strong media, we need media pluralism, and this has gone down also in Europe in a dramatic way. And we need media independence from policymakers, from political power. We know something, some of us here know something about it, how important media independence is. So, that's just to add to the list of ingredients.
No, thank you very much. It's also something that we discussed thoroughly this morning, actually, in one of our workshops. So
good to hear.
Very, very good. So now we move back to the European Parliament, and in particular, we are lucky that you are here because you have been rapporteur for the European Parliament proposal to reform the European electoral law. And also you've been actually the promoters of the European Parliament resolution to open the convention to change the treaties. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think that these two proposals from the Parliament are key actually to bridge the gaps between citizens, civil society as well, and the EU institutions?
Well, that's a big topic. I'll try to, I don't know, how much time do I have? No, seriously, 5 minutes?
Yes,
5 minutes? Okay. It's not easy in 5 minutes, but I'll try. First of all, of course, thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to touch upon these very relevant topics, from a democratic point of view. and being able to be here with in an event that is hosted by my good friend and colleague René Repassi, and organized with Civil Society Europe, good friends Carlota and Gabriela. And you mentioned two of the reports that I have worked on. As it happens sometimes with, or very often with singers, the most popular songs are not necessarily the most favorite ones by the singer, no? I'm saying this because I'm also very proud, and I think they are very relevant to this topic. My report on citizenship, European citizenship education, which I think is very much connected to the title of this seminar. Because if you are not aware of how Europe, by Europe I mean the EU and the EU institutions in particular, work and operate, and what's the Charter of Fundamental Rights, right? And many other things that happen here, then it's very difficult to build interest and trust in European institutions, no? And then we have also the report that I have also co-authored on European elections 2024, which is different from the one on electoral law, which is more recent and maybe more actionable, no? Because the electoral law, unfortunately, is blocked in the Council for now. Our proposal, I mean, no? I think a reflection on the title is also important, no? Because you say acting to rebuild citizens' trust in EU governance. So you're implying, maybe someone can take issue in that trust has been lost, no? This has to be also, maybe analyzed a bit more empirically, no? So trust has been lost. Well, maybe, but if we look at polls, typically European institutions appear with a higher level of trust than national institutions. No? So then maybe the loss of trust exists, but it maybe is even bigger for national institutions. I'm not saying that should be a consolation prize, no, for us. But okay, let's take this into account, no. So for me, maybe acting to improve citizens' interest, knowledge, and trust in EU governance. No? So this is why I think acting on, first of all, on citizenship education, it's I think the starting point. And this is not a rhetoric point. We have this report from the Parliament with concrete ideas, like the common curriculum for voluntary adoption. The Commission so far is not enthusiastic about that, but okay, we keep insisting. And then we have the idea of the module that we can introduce, the module on European citizenship education that we can introduce in all Erasmus Plus, programs. So basically all Erasmus, all the students in Europe that benefit from Erasmus and from European Solidarity Corps as part of the package of this Erasmus experience or ESC experience, they will have an online module on EU content that they have to follow. It's not so much to ask, because also a part of the scholarship is financed by the EU, so it's not so much to ask. And well, this is not out of the realm of political possibilities, because the Council adopted conclusions on the 29th of November under Spanish presidency. I also take the opportunity to thank the Spanish presidency for that. And these Council conclusions endorse the idea of the module. So that means the Commission, I think, can act on this idea. And as I said, we have something concrete and practical, which is part of rebuilding this trust. Now, final word, because I'm already probably exhausting my time on the electoral dimension and the treaty dimension. On the electoral dimension, of course, we have the idea of the pan-European electoral constituency. This is in the proposal for the European electoral law. And this is important because if we have, in addition to the 27 national constituencies. We have also the transnational constituency. Then it's possible to directly vote for European political parties and to directly vote to candidates for president of the Commission, because in our idea, the number one of this transnational party list will be the candidate for Commission president. No? So we think that we make the political game for European citizens more interesting, because we know that in national systems, by and large, there has been a presidentialistic mutation in parliamentary systems. So it's very clear that people believe that they are not just voting candidates for MPs, but also they are voting for a party leader, no, to become prime minister. So we need to replicate this in Europe, no, in a way, and make it more, I think, more interesting in order to increase participation. Because when we see that participation in European elections is systematically lower than in national elections, is this because a lack of trust in EU governance? Maybe in some proportion, going back to the title, but probably more of a lack of interest, or the feeling that they are second-order elections, no? Not as important as the national elections. So we need, even though, by the way, the participation has been improving in the last two occasions, we hope this trend continues in June, but we cannot take this for granted, so we need to. But this proposal, as I said, is blocked in the Council, so it will not be for now. But what we can do now, and this is the second report on elections that I mentioned, is we are asking the national parties to add the names and the symbols of the European political parties in the ballots at the national level, in the political advertisement. So we give more visibility to the European political parties and the candidates, also for Commission President, even if we don't have the transnational list, which is what makes it more clear, no? Clear. And this does not require to reform the electoral framework, at least at the European level, maybe at the national level, but not at the European level. And also to have political agreements between the European political parties on how to conduct the post-electoral process, for having this idea of competition for Commission President more grounded, and more than what happened in 2019, that in the end we elected someone that did not run for the election, no? Which was von der Leyen. And on treaty change, just very quickly, now it's very clear that with enlargement, if we take enlargement seriously, not everyone takes it seriously, by the way, yeah? But if you take it seriously, obviously you need another treaty, because the Lisbon Treaty is already showing limitations at 27, imagine at 36. I know many in the establishment, particularly think tanks, advisors to presidents of the institutions, don't like what I'm saying, but this is a bit like going to the dentist. I mean, you cannot postpone it forever. At some point, you have to go. So there is no way, believe me, you can make Lisbon Treaty work at 36 member states. But it is also an opportunity to increase trust and interest and democracy, because we can improve European democracy with a new constitutional treaty. For instance, the Parliament still does not co-decide on fundamental matters with the Council. Let's think of taxation. Let's think of debt. The issuance of debt to finance recovery plan, Parliament doesn't play any role. It's only Council. So those are fundamental matters, taxation, debt. We don't have the right to propose legislation. Only the Commission has this power. So we have a big opportunity if we work on a new treaty to include these new elements that I think will also, because reinforcing or strengthening parliamentary democracy at the European level, it's also, I think, a way of improving trust in EU governance. Apologies if I went too far.
Thank you very much. we now have a little time before our break, but nonetheless, I would like to invite actually you to either ask questions or make comments to the discussions that we had with the panel. I don't know if there is somebody, if you want to intervene, just raise your hand. I think we are all tired and eager for the coffee break. Yes, Christian.
And there's individual prizes, I think somebody from Serbia and somebody from Portugal. But I think at the end they will do the presentation.
I would just be curious to hear the experiences of Mr. Rees as a parliamentarian of the European Parliament, how the contact with basically the voters on the ground level works for a European parliamentary, because at the national level it's quite clear. Now there is a district. The relations between citizens and politicians are quite close, because they always have also very specific demands or queries to. So I can imagine what the trust relations might develop also as a relation between you voters and yourself. But I don't have any insight how this works for a member of the European Parliament, because the distance is quite big between the citizenship and the European Parliament. But how close are voters to you and you to voters?
Well, thank you, Christian, for the question, which is very relevant, no? Because, of course, the distance is above all a geographic factor, I will say, more than a political factor, because, and I'm going to answer with my personal experience, this is going to be different across member states, no? Because, for instance, in Italy, as you know, they have regional constituencies. So probably this is, from that point of view, better, no? Because you don't have to cover the entire country by definition. In the case of Spain, we have a single constituency. So technically, it is true that I represent citizens from the Canary Islands to the Pyrenees. So from that point of view, as you say, this is very difficult compared to an MP at the Spanish level that represents one province. In practice, what we do is that we divide the territory. So basically, since I come from the Valencian region, I focus mostly on my region. And then my colleague from Madrid focus in Madrid, my colleague from Galicia, from Catalonia. So in fact, even though we don't have a regional constituencies, in fact, for the elections, for the political work, we do it like that. So in this regard, the territory I have to cover is not much different from the territory a Spanish MP has to cover. Maybe a bit bigger, because I cover a full region composed of 3 provinces, and an MP focuses on one province only. But, you know, it's not the entire country, typically. So what we do is that, and I think this applies for the majority of MEPs, we go to our constituencies some once a week at the end of the session. So you spend in your constituency from Thursday to Monday every week, or at least once every 2 weeks. And you do political activity, you participate in seminars, you visit. I have a lot of myself relations with the mayors, no? So I visit mayors constantly, because many of them have funding from the European Union, or they want to access funding from the European Union. So they are always interested in knowing about opportunities, also for participating in European networks. So it's not only about financing, but also about getting information, access, influence, exchanging best practices. So for me, I don't think substantially different from that point of view of the work of an MP at the national level.
Thank you. That actually also made me think that we had a discussion also with the Vice President in charge of the relation with civil society in the Parliament, and there was supposed, but apparently has been lost. He was preparing apparently a report to assess different forms of participation, both with citizens and with civil society, to have an assessment of what the Parliament was doing and to be discussed in the Conference of Presidents. I hope this will come at a certain point. But one of the issues we were discussing with him was also the role of the national liaison office of the Parliament and how the members of the European Parliament could maybe further engage with the citizens and civil society organizations from the national level on the different political files. So I don't know if how what is your view on this? The same, a similar proposal was also to look at how the Commission offices, which have the Commission delegation outside the EU have a very strong role, but the ones for the EU, they are often more information point rather than an interaction with the national citizens. So this was one of the issues we were thinking and looking at.
If I may, because I forgot something also in connection with Christian, but on that I'm sure there is untapped potential in the offices, in the representation offices from the of the European Parliament at the national level, for sure. It will be good if we can have more, no? Because typically we have one or two. Like in Spain, once again, we have one in Madrid and Barcelona. And I always wonder why not to have one per region. No? This could seem excessive from the point of view of the cost, but I can imagine that maybe we can think of agreements by which, for instance, the region that is interested agrees to finance a good part of the cost, or to offer the headquarters, or, So if you want to have in the Valencian region the representation of the Parliament or of the Commission, you basically provide the majority of the means for this to happen. I can imagine something like that. But going back again to something I wanted to tell you that I forgot, which is important also in relation with voters, is that we have, and I think it's a bit underestimated, we have the visitors program of the European Parliament. This means, and by the way, I don't know of any national parliament that does that, at least certainly not the Spanish Parliament, because there is also a bit of a stereotype that we are the far and the distant ones, and the national ones are very open, very participatory, and very close, and I doubt that very much. Because the level of openness, maybe we have been even too open, if you think of some recent 1 year ago events, no? But these things that we're doing here, that we have parallel events constantly on a single basis in the European Parliament, is not common in my national parliament. And again, so we invite 100, each of us, MEPs, can invite up to 100 citizens per year to meet us in the European Parliament, to learn about the institution, to visit the hemicycle. So this is another way in which we are constantly in touch with civil society groups, with citizens, and with all sorts of associations that ask. And of course, we have many demands, and unfortunately, we cannot provide opportunities to everyone. We wish. I always exhaust my 100, and if they give me 200, I will also exhaust them.
So thank you. I don't know. I think we will close. I don't know if maybe yes. I wanted to ask the Commission and maybe a closing word also from Gabriella and Yelena before we close this session. So please, Mr. Lemaitre.
Well, first, I would tend to agree that we should not self-flagellate that much when it comes to European institutions, and it is not to say that there is no scope for improvement, but I do, in all honesty, believe that in comparison with national standards, we tend to align with the best there is at national level. Now, on the struggle that I think, will always face in Europe for the European public space, the fact that it is further away. There are language barriers, there are cultural barriers to overcome and all that. That has, of course, to trigger in us always renewed efforts to help overcome this and to facilitate the understanding of what is done at European level, how it is being cooked, that it is not, in fact, rocket science. We have a relatively classic democratic institutional setup at European level for making decisions. That even though national politicians usually do not recognize that, but that national decision makers are fully involved in this and usually vote in favor of whatever is being decided at European level. Still, I think we need to really see whatever we can do to make Europe closer, feel closer, more understandable. And for that, presence on the ground, yes, is part of it. We don't only have representations. I mean, representations are very much institutional translations of us as institutions in our roles, and therefore the representations of the commissions are in the capitals to start with, and then they have antennae eventually, possibly in bigger member states, but never more than one, in fact. So, if it's France, it's Paris, and then an antenna in Marseille. If it's Spain, indeed, Madrid and Barcelona. If it's Italy, it's Rome and Milan. But it is there also, and more, in fact, for communication channels with national administrations. The representations of the Commission I'm talking about now, right? And less for the public. But we are very often co-located with the European Parliament in our representations, and there is a dimension of accessibility to the public, to channel information, potentially as a civic space, indeed, to have debates, and there I would agree there is scope for doing much better than that. But I would suggest that we also look at everything that exists. We have a so-called network of edicts. It's European Documentation and Information Centers, if I'm not mistaken, where we fund that network, which is much more capillary across the EU and in the individual regions.
Europe Direct centers.
Sorry, Europe Direct centers, exactly, yeah. Now, I think that the ultimate aim that we should be having is one where the national dynamics integrate the European dimension and bring in the European dimension. We don't need only to have, specific European spaces to ensure that there are debates about European topics and joint topics. So for that, to me, availability, presence on the ground, indeed, of MEPs, of course, but European institutions, representatives, and mingling with also national actors of all types is even more important, I would say, than having real estate here or there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Gabriella and Yelena, concluding word?
Like a final word?
Yeah.
That we are all tired. I will be brief. I think that we should be looking ahead, and I don't mean this as an encouragement or the words of hope, but actually as a plea to be more worried, more concerned, because I think that major crises, global crises, are ahead of us. War in Ukraine is it's not even close to being over. We have a major crisis in the Middle East. Things are emerging in the Pacific, and EU should act as a global actor as well, and we should be really asking other questions of how we have to build trustworthy institutions for these new global challenges, and we should not be looking to the past and assessing what we did and in comparison to national institutions would be good or not, did we perform well or not. But world is changing rapidly, and I think that we need new questions, new discussions, but still the issue of trust and distrust will be fundamental. I think that we really need to understand how to build more trustworthy institutions.
Great. And as a final word from me, perhaps just to mention the potential of the defense of democracy package and the concerns that we have at the moment, that it's not really in its current form being able to reach its full potential, focusing on external threats, not focusing on internal threats from hate speech and from extremism and populism and the things that we have within the EU, which are also a threat to our democracy and need to be defended. So certainly there, hopefully from Civil Society Europe's perspective, we want to continue working with the institutions to improve this package and make sure that it really does what it says on the tin, that it's really defending democracy and defending the democracy that we strive for in the EU, based on EU values, not some other people's interpretation of democracy. And that's something that we can continue to work on. And certainly the outcomes of this project and the continued work of all our organizations in all our different ways, shapes, and forms that we all contribute to democracy in Europe can help to yes, rebuild or at least improve the trust that we have between citizens and the European institutions and the European project as a whole, which I think is also at the heart of the question.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the whole panel for this. Hope that you found interesting discussion. And we are going to have a coffee break of 10 minutes. For those who are watching live stream, just keep the channel open because we'll be back soon. And after that, we'll have something extremely interesting, which is the Creative Youth Contest ceremony. And we have here with us a lot of young people who participated and have a very interesting views to present on the Europe they would like to see. And so we'll be back soon, and thank you very much.
I'm sure we're all... Can we move? I need to move closer. I'm sure we're all enjoying our coffees, but if it's possible to come a bit closer, that would be great, so we can continue with the awarding ceremony of the youth contest. I'm also... Can you actually hear me in the room? I'm unsure that not exactly, right? It's a bit... I don't know if it's far. Oh. Probably it's just not designed for women to sit here. Moving a bit on, thank you for joining and slowly taking your seats. We would be moving on to the next part in the agenda, which is going to be a celebratory moment that I'm sure many of you in the room were looking forward to, because we're going to be giving out the awards for the Europe We Trust Visions of European Youth Award ceremony. And I look around and a lot of our awardees are already in the room. So that's really nice to see. It's always great to see young people in the European Parliament. And it's really great to celebrate the visions of young people. And also, as the award says, there's a lot for the future of Europe, but also a lot for the present of Europe that you're contributing to. So super happy to give out these awards and continue engaging with you. And basically, first of all, perhaps an introduction of why am I speaking and who I am. My name is Judith Lantai, and I am the Vice President of Civil Society Europe. I'm also the Secretary General of the Young European Federalists, JEF Europe, which is a youth network that brings together active young people also working towards Europe. So they also share their visions on the daily in different spaces. And I'm very happy to be here with you and passing on this award. But before we go a lot into detail about the award and actually pass on to you these awards, we will also share a little bit about what the contest actually was and what are the details of it. And we also have our invited guest here on behalf of the European Commission, who's going to be giving some forewords in a minute. So now that we're settled, I would say we go forward with understanding what actually the contest is about, and I would look towards the slides. Thank you very much. So just to recap, I'm sure many in the room know, but it's good to know also for those who are following us online that there was a contest called A Europe We Trust, Visions of European Youth. And basically it was involving young people from 13 to 19 years old living in Europe. And they were asked to share their visions for the future of Europe in a creative format. And with this, the aim was basically that young people would think about the future of Europe and how Europe can actually better serve their needs and their attitudes towards European governments and institutions. As part of this contest, there was also a jury brought forward who were assessing all of the great contributions from young people who were basically putting forward their visions for Europe. And you see their names also on the screen, as I know some of them are actually in the room. So thank you for joining us also today. We had Andrea Lepeña as Deputy Director of the Lifelong Learning Platform, who was in the jury. We had Carmen Romero sitting in the room as Membership and Governance Coordinator of the Organizing Bureau of the European School Student Unions. We also had Lenka Stepankova, Assistant Professor at the Department of Psychology at the Faculty of Social Studies at Masaryk University, also sitting with us in the room. And we also had Mariam Pradella, Research Associate at the Chair of Sociology, Comparative Cultural Sociology, and European Political Sociology at the University of Siegen, with a long name, but with also a lot of enthusiasm, of course, in the jury. So basically, this jury came together and assessed all of the submissions that were put forward. These submissions were sorted based on 3 age categories. The first one was from 13 to 14 years old. The second category was from 15 to 16 years old. And the third category was from 17 to 19 years old. And based on this age and other criteria, such as the message and communication, the creativity, the uniqueness and originality, the consistency with the team, and the aesthetic appeal of the creative piece put forward, the jury basically chose one winning artist, or one winning submission, I should say, per age category. Because as you will see, sometimes it's an individual contribution, but people could also submit it as a group. So this is a bit about the contest itself. You can see a QR code here that you can scan for actually accessing all of the winners already on the website. I'm not just taking away the excitement. We already know them for a while. So no worries, they're actually available there. It might be nicer to see it on your phones. So we will move on to actually passing on these awards very soon. But before we do that, I would actually also like to make sure that we have our guest take his time and introduce himself. So I'm happy to invite Harry Panagopoulos, legal officer for democracy, union, citizenship, and free movement, working at DG Just at the European Commission, to open up the ceremony.
Thank you very much, Judith. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. This is easily the nicest thing that I'm doing in 2024. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk to you. As Judith mentioned, I come from the part of the Commission which works on union citizens' rights. These are rights that all of us have. And they include the rights that give you the opportunity to work and study in different countries in the Union, as well as the rights to vote, to enjoy consular protection, and so on and so forth. I will not bore you with the stuff that I deal with on a daily basis, simply to note that it is a huge privilege for me to speak to you and to sort of be in a room with a group of people who have spent a lot of time thinking deeply about what they think, what they would like Europe to be. It's also what I spend a lot of my time doing, but in a very different way. And it's very inspiring. It's very exciting to have joined you here today. It was interesting to hear even some of the work that we get involved with, like the Defense of Democracy package being mentioned in the previous session. I've also worked on legislation on political advertising, on the voting rights of mobile citizens. So it's all flavors that we add to the things that we do. I don't want to take up more of your time, so I will just help deliver your certificates. I just want to congratulate you all the winners and all the participants for this excellent effort. And I hope that we can continue to support projects like this one in the future.
Thank you very much, Harry. Because indeed also Harry is here with us to hand out the certificates that the winners are about to get. And I'm sure there's a lot of excitement already in the room. I will lay out how the process will go so you can more or less at least understand when is your moment to come out. We will go by age categories to give out the awards. And after that, we will also have some honorable mentions actually that I think is relevant for everyone to be aware of. And without further ado, I would say that we start with the first age category and we meet the winners. In the age category of 13 to 14 years, our winner is actually Barbara Martins from Esporão, Portugal. I will do my best to do correct pronunciations, but I'm very sorry, I'm Hungarian, so I'm at a bit of a disadvantage to be able to connect to some of the pronunciations. I'm trying. And to be sure to share what we also see on the screen and what I'm about to share now is a short description from the winner themselves. And basically it reads as follows. Now we are just millions of students, but one day we will be the ones to control the world. Every single one of us is going to have an impact on the society we will live in. We need to start giving the earth what it wants and not only what we want. Please, you can also see the actual art piece. So I would actually invite our winner to the stage to take their certificate. There she is. Congratulations. Can I take a picture of the three of you?
Sure. Should we go?
Yeah,
yes.
I think it makes sense. And now our winner is also going to share a bit in a few words about their vision for the future of Europe. Please, the floor is yours. You need to push the button, and then it opens the microphone so you can explain.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara, and thank you so much for giving me this award. This is very important to me, but mostly because I feel like someone recognized my work, and actually someone cared about young people's voice, about what we have to say to the world. My work was based on many things, on young people's voices, but it was also based on the protection of plants by creating small seed banks around the world. For instance, in countries, a small seed bank on the north, a small seed bank on the south, and one in the center, for instance, or just one for a country, with all the seeds that are from that country. So like that, if for instance, a big wildfire happened, it was easy to rebuild everything again from the start, and we wouldn't have that big deal. My work was also based on the rural areas. Those areas are far away from the cities, but there are lots of plants there. The air is pure air, which only makes good things to humans, and that's really an important thing. And thank you once again for this award. And yes, and that's it. Good evening.
Congratulations.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next age category. It's between 15 and 16 years old. We actually have a big group of people who submitted a collaborative work. Again, apologies if the pronunciation is not exactly on point. I'll try. So we have Sofia Gonzalez, Clara Lopez, Angel Munoz, Marta Arminio, Luis Carazon, Itziar Daza, Álvaro de la Flor, Paula González, Diego Merino, Lucia Moreira, and Luis Artungonu from Manuel de Falla High School, which is located in Coslada, Madrid, from Spain. And basically, what they say shortly about the art piece, and they're about to explain in detail, is that this picture wants to remind European people that by voting in the next elections to the European Parliament in May, we vote to keep EU values alive, such as peace, democracy, freedom, equality, human rights, and sustainability. And let's see the picture and bring our winners to the stage, please. Yeah. Yes. Please come join us on stage for getting your certificate. And yes.
My goodness. So, this is going to be tricky. If I let you distribute it to each other, would that make more sense?
For the pictures.
I thought this was going to take one.
Supone que nosotros vamos atrás. Supone que los bajitos van adelante. Supone que los bajitos vais ahí abajo. Ahora nos organizamos para el aquí no. Tú, pero no.
Harry, I think I need you more like this. Yes, that is what we need.
Los pequeños abajo.
Thank you. And since we have a big group, we only have 3 people sharing about their future for the vision. It would be very difficult for all of them to speak. And please, you can
Three seats on
actually, yes, of course. Makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much for this prize and for the opportunity of being here. Manuel de Falla High School in Coslada has been always a pro-European and institutional vocation with participation in numerous projects and activities of international dimension that allows us to learn more about the EU and other cultures in order to build responsible, active, respectful, and well-rounded citizens in an international world. Our school has been engaged in the European Parliament Ambassador School project for 7 years. The Ambassador School projects, very consolidated in our high school, bring students closer to the European institutions, their functioning, and the impact that the EU has on our lives in an active way so we can experience European citizenships. It is already a tradition to see in the corridors of the school the info point with lots of information and symbols about the European Union, stars, countries, values, flags, current news, and school EU projects. That reminds us that we are part of the European Union and the importance of these memberships.
We are part of a team of motivated junior ambassadors. We arrange engaging activities to show the EU to the rest of the community in order to increase awareness of the European parliamentary democracy, the institutions, and values. We have participated in a model European Union. We have attended talks, and then we are able to organize contests and even a prom, a Europe dance to celebrate Europe Day. We are also currently involved in a Jean Monnet project called EU Education Matters, in which learning about the European Union is not a typical subject. It is a project based and has a cross-curricular approach with several subjects involved. This project promotes critical thinking and creativity so that learning about the EU inspires students to carry out motivating activities. When our teacher, Carmen, the coordinator of the project, shared with us the contest, a Europe we Trust vision of European youth, we're all enthusiastic with the opportunity to share our views about the future of Europe. We gather to brainstorm ideas and share opinions, and we put our creativity to work.
We had some ideas we would like to be tackled in the EU, such as mental health, migration, and the importance of voting in the European Parliament elections. And finally, we were able to create 4 visuals related to these issues. Actually, one visual related to migration has achieved a honorable mention. It took us several days to decide on the photo design and several days to take the photo until we were satisfied with the result. With this picture, we want to encourage EU citizens to vote in the next elections in June, as there is too much at stake. By voting in the next European Parliament elections, we vote for the values it promotes: democracy, freedom, peace, equality, human rights. We are now involved in a campaign called Walk the Talk EU to promote voting in the EU elections in Coslada, our city, with different actions in collaboration with the town hall. We are going to use this picture as a promotional material to encourage our neighbors to vote. We are convinced that it is for us to decide and that the power is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, also European elections is also good to hear. It's coming up, and even in these categories, also where these are a part of, actually people can vote. So it is also indeed in your hands as well, in that regard. And moving on, actually, to the biggest group when the computer loads that can actually also vote in the parliament elections, is our last category of age group for 17 to 19-year-olds. And our winner is Teja Josipovic from Serbia. And her short description that accompanies her creative work is as follows. What I would like to see in the future of Europe would definitely be a greater emphasis on the mental health of all the people. I envision a future where people spend more time outdoors, breathing fresh air, surrounded by nature. I truly wish to see people actively and independently, even through small actions, contribute to a clearer environment in the future, rather than solely relying on the authorities to take steps. And let's see the artwork. And where is Teja, actually? Oh, there she is.
Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to say that it's truly an honor and pleasure to be with all of you here tonight. And although we are all coming from different countries and different cities, so we are facing different issues every day, we all aim to make our home, Europe, a better place to live. And I'm sure that younger generations of Europeans will know how to realize their dreams in the next decades. Europe of future offers a wide range of ideas and aspirations for all of us, especially young people. And in my work, I wanted to present a Europe with greater emphasis on mental health and sustainability. So thank you for award. I'm really honored with this.
Thank you very much. So these were our winners for the contest, basically. Congratulations once again for all of the awardees. However, we also wanted to make sure that we, again, there's something with the mic. The other mic is on. Thank you very much. Just to translate also to the room, when there's multiple microphones open, the camera doesn't really follow the person speaking at the moment. So we had to fix that part. Thank you. And yes, without further ado, moving on from technicalities, we would also have our honorable mentions, which are basically art pieces that were unique, special, somehow are worth really showcasing and highlighting from all of the submissions that were received. But of course, there could only be one winner. So we would wanted to make sure that there's also a mention for them. And we're gonna showcase them now. In the category of 13 to 14-year-olds, we basically have Paula Garcia Jimenez from Spain. And you can see the art piece also represented next to their name. I think they're also deserving a clap for the mention. Then we also have Mahasin Mohammed and Fatima Ismail from Ireland, who submitted the art piece you can see here. It also has text on it. I suggest that in the QR code, you can actually see it in bigger. It's on your phone, so you can check the art piece a bit more in detail, but they do deserve their appreciation for the art piece, I would say. And then moving on to our next category, in the 15 to 16-year-olds, we had Abriel Albert from Spain. And let's give, actually we have to showcase the video, correct? Yes. So he sent a video instead of a picture, which we're now gonna see, so you also get to see the whole piece. And in the same category, we also have Julia Castaña and Nora Llenas, also from Spain, as you can see, and the art piece is right there. And we also have Yana Fares Magin, again from Spain, with the art piece you also see on the presentation. We see that a lot of people from Spain have an opinion about the future of Europe, right? That's also good to understand. Then again, from Spain, exactly, we have Ayanara Ayuso Velo and Aaron Arjonilla Loureiro with the following art piece that you can also see there. And with this, we're moving on to the honorable mentions in our last category to 17, 19 years old, where we have Alexandru Irina Mihaela, this time from Romania, with the picture that you can see there. And Domenico Gaio and the students of the 5th class of the ITE of Vigianello from Italy. And with this, we're concluding, almost concluding the event. Just wanted to once again congratulate all of the winners in the contest and thank everyone who participated and submitted an art piece. As I think Harry mentioned, thinking hard about the future of Europe and the vision for Europe can be a complicated exercise, but a worthy one. So it's nice to be in the presence of people who do so and continue working on these things together. Again, you can check the artwork online, also in a bigger detail if you would like to do so. And I just want to thank you for your attention, for giving also the award ceremony this moment together. So thank you very much. And I've been asked to actually invite already to the floor Christian Lahusen for closing down the overall event, if I'm not mistaken, and thanking, of course, Harry for his participation in this event.
So thank you a lot, Judith and Harry, for presenting and leading the award ceremony. I think this was a fascinating and inspiring moment of the hard work of today. I don't want to lose a lot of words because I think the most important point is up to coming, namely the reception. As far as I know, it's going to be here. No, we need somebody who maybe explains where we move. So let me thank everybody who has participated during this tomorrow morning session and the afternoon. I think we all are taking home a lot of information and indications on the topic of trust and distrust, a lot to think about. But I just want to add one point. I think this award ceremony has shown that one element of trust has been unmentioned so far, the aspect of hope. I think people who trust still have hope in that it is worth continuing, that it is worth expecting the best out of political institutions, out of responsible people, out of yourself in making the best out of your own future. And I think that's an inspiring message of all of you young people, that indeed don't lose the hope, don't lose also the trust in that you are able to make a difference. And if this is the message of the day, I think that's an important message to keep in mind.